Okay, Section 5, creating the existing transit network using GTFS. All right, so in this section, we'll talk about creating the current network scenario. How does GTFS work with TBEST? Importing existing GTFS feeds for base year development. Import options, overwrite options, using TBEST to export transit networks to GTFS format. All of that we'll talk about. So creating the current network scenario. So what we've done already is we've taken the June 2021 network, but in actuality, whenever we're creating a TDP, we would want to bring in the latest network as opposed to a network from the spring. We would probably want to use something from now or the fall as our basis for comparison, right? So we want to have a current network scenario so that reflects what's on the ground right now, so that when we're looking out into the future, we're comparing it relative to what's going on right now, and then out into the future, how we would modify that. So that's the point of this particular procedure, is to make sure that we're doing that inside of TBEST. Okay. So once we do this, we're going to import the GTFS feed into this copied scenario. So essentially, we're going to copy the June 2021. We're going to make it fall 2021, and we're going to bring in the fall 2021 GTFS so that it matches up. Also note that if your validated base scenario service has not changed, this step is not necessary. So you wouldn't need to do this if your service is the same, that you want to use it out for the TDP. So this is an optional step. If you're okay with your June 2021 network and want to use that within your TDP, then you don't need to do this step. Okay, so let's talk about the GTFS and how it works with TBEST. So essentially, there is a tool inside of TBEST that allows you to import a GTFS. Well, that means transit routes and transit service into TBEST scenarios. And you can do that for a base year service or proposed service. So our June 2021 was from that GTFS. We're going to do fall 2021. That service is on the ground too, but it's kind of a separate GTFS file. You can select representative weekday, Saturday, and Sunday service so that you can then filter that to show a particular day, right? So the way that this works is that in this interface, you would select the zip file that is your GTFS, and you would select a representative day that would filter the GTFS service periods that are in operation specifically on a date that you would select. And you do that for weekday, Saturday, and Sunday. And when you do that, it will filter these lists of routes and show you the trip levels that are within the GTFS that on or in service on those particular days. So that is kind of the mechanism for selection for building in what you want to import. So essentially, with minimal review, the GTFS network is ready for TBEST modeling analysis. So after we do this import, especially if we've already validated our system and we're kind of writing over the existing routes, it's ready for a modeling analysis straight from the GTFS. There's very little that you would need to do to review. So what I would also say is that the APC stop level ridership data for TBEST application can be added either at this point, but primarily you would want to do this prior to validation, because that's the data that you would want to bring in if you have observed ridership for. You can also do it for this as well. That's totally fine. You can do that. So whatever GTFS you're bringing in, if you have stop ridership for it, then you configure it in the stop ridership.txt, which the full documentation on this is in the user guide. So if you're looking at like, well, he's talking about this, so I don't know what that means. In the user guide, it does have examples of how you would configure it and the specifications for it. And it's essentially just grouping TBEST or your ridership by TBEST time period and averaging it for each TBEST time period per route pattern stop. So at the stop level, by pattern for each route. And those the IDs in the stop ridership.txt, meaning the route ID, stop ID, or I'm sorry, pattern ID, stop shape ID, which is the GTFS ID, and the stop ID have to match the GTFS that you're bringing in. So that's kind of the difficult part of that, is you have to match up your APC data to both the TBEST time periods and average it by time period, and then also put in the GTFS IDs so that it will come in directly. Okay. So you can also export a GTFS. So once you've kind of brought it in and changed it, you can export it out for use in other contexts, including FTA stops model. So in terms of interoperability of TBEST and GTFS, essentially it will take a GTFS from anything where you can produce that file. So whether it's Trapeze or Remix or Optibus or FTA stops GTFS or regional agency GTFS, if you have multiple agencies you want to combine into one network, you can do that. Just like we did, as I mentioned at the outset, where we have all of the Florida transit routes in one single scenario, that is the ability of TBEST to bring all of those networks into a single scenario network and use them inside of TBEST and view them. So that's the interoperability part. So it doesn't have to be your operations GTFS. It can be a planning GTFS that you might get from Remix. It might be something that comes from the stops model that you've configured for stops and you want to bring that to TBEST. Or you can use multiple agency files and bring those into TBEST. So let's talk a little bit about the GTFS translation to TBEST-Network, because we don't keep everything that is in the GTFS, but we do keep most of it. So where that it kind of deviates is with the actual arrival times at stops. What we know and what we keep in our files for TBEST is all of the initial trip start times. So just like we have here in this list for Route 11, all of the trip start times come in from the GTFS. But what we don't keep is all the downstream stop arrival times that you would have on your, your stop times table. What we do is, you notice that what we did was we kept the speeds of the in-vehicle times at the segment level by time period, right? So what we do is we use those speeds to then calculate downstream arrival times at stops based on segment speeds and in-vehicle times. So essentially it uses the data that's in the GTFS, but it just makes it a little simpler in the TBEST interface to modify and use that data without adjusting every single downstream arrival time, because that could be really time consuming. So what we do is we synthesize those, but the synthesis, oh boy, I can't believe I went there. Synthesizing those doesn't really hurt your data that much. You might be off by a minute or two on your downstream, and when you get all the way downstream, it depends on how you coded it, but it's not off by very much. So essentially it allows you to have a little bit of wiggle room in terms of error, but you have a lot faster network coding time. Okay, so general GTFS import sequence in TBEST, you reference the source GTFS, you select your weekday, Saturday, Sunday service dates by GTFS service period. You can also individually select them if you wish. So once you do that, TBEST will automatically populate the list of GTFS routes with service levels measured in one-way vehicle trips in the list of routes. So this list gets automatically populated when you select a date here, here, or here. It will tell you all the routes that are in service for whatever you select, and it tells you the trips. Okay, so this is the weekday one-way trips for Route 1 is 105, for Saturday it's 62, and Sunday it's 30. So it's telling you inside of the GTFS for these service IDs on this particular dates that you've selected, these are the trips inside the GTFS. Now the reason that we put these here is so you know what you're looking at. because you can make different selections in these boxes where you have service that isn't running on the same day, but you've selected it using, maybe these pick lists, and you have too many trips. So those trips aren't all in service at the same time on the same day. So it's basically incorrect. So this is a screening mechanism for you to QC your data before it comes into TBEST. Additionally, you have whenever you're doing this is June 2021 scenario we're importing to. It will look into that scenario and see if that route already exists, the one that's coming in from the GTFS, and then it will say that it's going to overwrite it. Likewise, if that route does not exist in the June 2021 scenario, it's going to insert it as a new route. Also, if you check this option under route import settings to show TBEST routes not in GTFS, what this means is that you have routes in the TBEST scenario that are not in the GTFS, and it will ask you to remove them. Right? So basically, the network that you want to bring in is specific to that GTFS. So it's not enough just to say, I want to bring these routes in from the GTFS, because you already have those routes internal in TBEST. Then you need to remove the ones that aren't in the GTFS. And this is like a holistic way to say, I want to overwrite, I want to insert, and I want to remove, and I can see all those listings here in my table. Okay, and then once you're done, you make your selections on what you want to do and hit import, and it will import them in. Okay, so a few of the settings that we have in TBEST, you can reset the scenario routes for, these are the GTFS import settings. You can reset scenario routes. We mentioned this, what this will do is remove all scenario routes and repopulates the route validation collections. So if ever you want to say, I want to completely reset this scenario, remove all of the existing routes, and also repopulate all of my validation collections with the routes that are coming in, then that is this option. And you can only do that with an unvalidated scenario. So just bear that in mind, that this is a great way to just clean everything out and start all over with new route validation collections. Show unmatched GTFS and TBEST routes. So that's this one, and that's the utilized to clean the existing scenario network when importing new service from GTFS. So we just talked about that one. You can add the agency prefix to the GTFS route name. So this is where if you have multiple agencies that you want to bring into a single network, you can add their prefix as defined in the agency.txt to each route name. And then when you import it, it will append that into the route name there, and you'll be able to identify BCT versus Miami-Dade versus Palm-Tran routes that are in your system. So it's a great way to have the regional routes, but also know exactly where they're coming from. Okay. So there's another options, network import options. If you have the stop ridership.txt in your GTFS, it will automatically select this and it will import the stop ridership. So that's good. The merge identical route patterns is a way to basically clean route patterns that are identical, that have been basically copied for different trip purposes. So let's say that you have trips on pattern A for the weekday, and then you've actually, for Saturday, you've copied over that same pattern A, but you have your trips tied to Saturday, and then the same for Sunday. Well, essentially, TBEST doesn't need 3 patterns there, that they're all the same pattern. You can just aggregate the trips up to one pattern that would basically be the roll up of all of them. So this is a way of cleaning your network so you don't have too many route patterns and too many, a duplicative information in the TBEST network. And I'll say that, this is commonly not used, but I've used it, for example, on WMATA in Washington, D.C., and it literally cut the number of patterns and stops that are in the TBEST network in half, because they had a lot of duplicative data in there that didn't need to be in that structure. So this is one way of doing that. Okay, and everything else is, okay, so the time point definition, the time point column, if you're familiar with stoptimes.txt, it does have this optionally. There are a few other options for the time point definition, but and also no time point defined is the other option here. So this is pretty important for TBEST because what this does is it will actually break the segments at the time points and calculate the speeds and vehicle times at time points along a segment. And as I mentioned, that downstream stop arrival times are kind of dependent on how accurate your time point times are and speeds are. So this is a pretty important element of all of how TBEST uses that data and calculates it. And if you don't have this defined, it will automatically default to no time points defined, and then it will be a single segment that makes up your entire route pattern. Okay, I am going to skip this because I think we've already covered it for the most part. All right, so what you get once you import is a GTFS history. And this is a really great way once you've imported, and you might say you're doing multiple GTFS imports, you have the ability to go back and look at the history of all of the imports that you made. And what TBEST does, it stores the original GTFS file, and it stores your options, the date and time that you did it, and all the service IDs that you selected, and all the actual routes that you imported, so that you have a history of everything that you brought into TBEST, so that you can always go back if you have questions about what happened. Oh, what did I bring in? I don't remember. Then the history will help you piece that together and hopefully shed some more light on where you're at with your processes. The network, GTFS network export option is also available in the menu options where you can export the entire network to a GTFS, or if you're in the scenario network editor, you can select particular routes that you want to export, and we'll export just those selected routes to GTFS. Okay. Any questions on that? I don't think I see any. So it is 2:55. We've been at this for a little while. So actually, let's just run. This is very quick. We'll run through this, and then we're going to run the ridership estimation model afterwards. So yeah, so let's walk through this process and go forward with it. So this is 5 and TBEST-GTFS import. So I'm going to get rid of my Gatorville 1 transit system that I brought in, and I'm going to go again to Gatorville. Okay, so import the September 2021 network into a new application scenario. So in TBEST Explorer, copy the June 2021 scenario into a new scenario. So if I right click on it, I can select the copy option. And I'm going to call it Fall 2021. And that's all. That's the only property I want to change is Fall 2021. It's going to create this for me. Okay, great. So now I have Fall 2021 scenario that contains exactly what is in my base read-only scenario. So these are duplicates of each other. And what I want to do is right-click on Fall 2021 and go to GTFS Import Export Tools and go to Import Routes from GTFS. Once I am here, I'm going to select the GTFS file that I want to bring in, and that is in the C TBEST Transit Systems Gatorville data folder, and we want to bring in the Fall 2021 training zip. So that's this file. So once I click the OK button, it will load that data in and show me the service IDs that are available in the GTFS here for weekday, Saturday, and Sunday. So if you're familiar, it reads the calendar.text and calendar dates, and populates the service IDs in here. So what you'll notice too is that you have an HS here to HS here, which means that this is probably something that runs on a holiday. So there might be a holiday in this particular weekday service in the calendar dates where you have, or here, where you have this Saturday service, let's say, that runs on a weekday. So that's the kind of thing that we want to avoid including with our overall selection. So what you can do is select a particular date. And what we're going to do is select the September 7th, here a Tuesday for 2021. And what TBEST does is it filters out the service IDs that are operating on this date, selects them, and then populates all the routes that are operating on that day into the list and shows you the number of one-way trips for each on the weekday. So we haven't selected our Saturday and Sunday yet, so we need to do that next. So let's select Saturday is going to be 9/11, and Sunday is going to be 9/12. And when I do select this, notice that it populates the trips in here as well. Okay, great. So if we scroll down our list, we see that most of the routes are already existing in our TBEST network, so it's just going to overwrite them. Now, when it overwrites them, if there is a service change, it will, implement the service change into TBEST and overwrite what was there before. So this is an overwrite with the new service, and any alignment changes, etc., will be implemented in TBEST. And here's our Route 76, which is a new route. So what we want to do is examine, are there any routes in the TBEST network that aren't in the GTFS? And that's when we click this button, what it does is it shows us, yes, there are several routes in the TBEST network that are not in the GTFS, which means they've been discontinued. So we want to remove those. So automatically when we do that, the default action is to remove those routes. So I think that's it. That's what we have fully set up. And if we want to go to take a look at the time point data, then the native GTF time points are what's defined in the GTFS. You also could use time point column, but both are available. So if you wanted to add the agency prefix, you could do that. And it kind of changes things, but it adds regional transit system, which is the RTS in Gainesville. So it adds that system name to the route itself, the route name, so that you could identify the transit system if you had a regional network if you wanted to. I'm going to uncheck that, and that will put everything back to where we had it before. And I'm just going to select the select all option and hit import. And yes, I do want to execute that. Anybody have a question to this point? Before I do this, I'm going to say no, just to make sure everyone's on the same page here.
I don't see any questions, Rodney.
Okay. So I'm going to click import and say yes, and it will go through that. So let's take a break. It's 3:01. Let's come back at 3:15 if we can. Sorry to cut that short, but we'll come back at 3:15 and the GTFS will be imported and we can move forward. When the import is completed, it will ask you, do you want to open the imported routes in TBEST? You can just say yes, because we want to just take a look at and make sure everything came in correctly. So in our list, we should have our new route 76 came in. So this was the new route that we had added. So that's good. And if we wanted to, we can take a look at the properties for it just by double clicking on it. And then we can kind of see, okay, here's the layout where the time points are, the service levels and the speeds, etc. You know, just coming directly in from the GTFS, they'll give us this information. And we're going to assume the rest of the routes, either they had changes or not. We'll find out whenever we do our evaluations of the routes in comparative mode tomorrow. But for right now, we'll assume everything came in correctly. The routes are here, they were overwritten, and all the routes that we had to be removed are gone. So it did the cleaning process. The GTFS, basically, this is the full network that represents the fall 2021 service.